A 3-oscillator setup seems to be the high-end standard in the land of synths. That benchmark has a lot to do with some of the first synths available to a wide public, like the Minimoog Model D, EMS VCS 3 and ARP 2600, all 3-oscillator synths. But modern classics like the Pro 3 or even polysynths like the Hydrasynth or Peak also have a 3-oscillator setup. So should you have a triple oscillator bank in your modular? Obviously the answer is no. There are tons of fantastic single and dual oscillator sounds, but it's still fun to explore what patches and ideas are possible with a triple oscillator setup. In this video I'll use my Nano Modules ONA oscillator bank, and if you've been watching the channel you know I like Nano Modules. The ONA is an excellent price-conscious analog oscillator for multiple reasons I'll touch on today. And Nano also offers all their modules for free on VCV Rack if you like to test any of these ideas. As always, have a look at my Patreon if you like to get access to PDF sheets of all my patch ideas and like to support my work. But now, let's dive right in. There are two reasons why the triple oscillator standard is a bit misleading in a modular context. The first is caused by classic synths like the original Minimoog. Even though they had a very impressive triple oscillator setup, there were no other oscillators at all. So if you wanted some flowing slow modulation in a patch, one of the oscillators had to be set to a low frequency mode to create an LFO. Many classic patches with a bit of slow modulation to the filter or pitch only used 2 audible oscillators and 1 oscillator as a modulator. So if you have any other LFO modules, 2 oscillators are enough for many if not most classic patches, and a third oscillator isn't necessary at all. Using a full-featured VCO as LFO has its own benefits though, but I'll come back to that later. The second reason the 3-oscillator standard is a bit misleading is the lack of sub-oscillators in many of those synths. Many classic fat patches are created by tuning one of the 3 oscillators exactly 1 octave below the main oscillator to add a lot of low end to the sound. But many modern modular oscillators can generate sub-octaves from a single module. Here's a 2-oscillator detuned voice with a sub-octave from the main oscillator. And here's a sound with 2 sub-octaves from a single ONA. So again, for a lot of classic patches with a massive low end, you don't need that third oscillator if you have a sub output. On the other hand, using a third full-featured VCO as sub does offer fun options to explore as well. But let's start with the main reason 3 oscillators can be fun. When you have 3 independent oscillators, the frequency of each oscillator can be unique. Here's a classic voice using 3 oscillators, a mixer, low-pass filter and VCA. The voice is controlled with a sequencer and single envelope modulating the filter and VCA. There are many ways 3 independent tuned oscillators can lead to interesting sounds. Here, all 3 oscillators are tuned to a C, and all oscillators receive the same major scale sequence from the SQ1. Even though all oscillators are tuned to the same note, stacking them creates interesting sounds because it brings out the smallest frequency differences. Here's the same setup, but let's turn the third oscillator up to an E, still receiving the same sequence. And here's the same setup again, with the oscillators tuned to a C, E and G, all receiving the same sequence. And one more, here the oscillators are tuned to a C 1 octave below that and a D sharp. If this tuning stuff is new territory to you, it's worth it to learn a bit more about scales, but that's beyond the scope of this video. For now, I want to touch on a wide range of ideas. One of them is that you can play with the presence of each oscillator in the mix. For example, here the second and third oscillator are tuned a third and fifth above the main oscillator and sent through a crossfader before joining the mix. Modulating the crossfader with an LFO creates a shifting mix of overtones. It's also easy to send each oscillator in a voice different pitch information. Here the third oscillator is droning at a steady frequency, while the first and second oscillator each receive a different sequence. This creates a 3-note paraphonic voice. Tuning oscillators can be a video topic on its own. You can expand this to an actual polyphonic patch or even 3 single oscillator voices if you have enough other modules. And all of these patches are great fun with MIDI sequencing or a keyboard as well. But let's tackle some other concepts. A third oscillator also has a lot of value as a tuned audio rate modulator. Here's the same classic synth voice, but this time only 2 oscillators are sent to the mix and part of the main audio path. The third oscillator's sine wave is sent through 2 VCAs used to control the depth of frequency modulation to the other oscillators. 2 unsynced LFOs are modulating the VCAs to create FM modulation that fades in and out. You can leave the third oscillator untuned or send it a copy of the primary sequence for different effects. When FM is done in subtle ways, it's a great trick to add variation to sequences or texture to drums. This is the same patch but slowed down. You can use audio rate modulation on a lot of different destinations for interesting effects. Here's the same voice expanded with a wave folder. The third oscillator is sent through a panner modulated with a sine wave LFO. The panner's outputs are sent to modulate the wave folder and filter frequency to create deep textured sounds. Here's the same patch, just tweaking the frequency of the LFO modulating the panner by hand. A tuned modulating oscillator can also be used for complex wave shaping. Here, 2 main square wave oscillators with different tuning are sent through 2 VCAs before joining the mix. The third sine wave oscillator is sent through a panner and used to modulate those VCAs for complex wave shaping. The panner is modulated with a slow sine wave LFO. Experimenting with different waves, sending the modulator a sequence or not, and adding subtle drifting to the modulating oscillator all lead to subtle different results. Have a look at my video on audio rate amplitude modulation if you'd like to learn more about this. Of course, with 3 oscillators you can also push and explore FM as far as you like. Here's the classic 3 oscillator voice again. In this setup, 3 sine waves with different tunings are used in the main audio path, and a copy of each wave is sent to a VCA. These VCAs are modulated with LFOs. The VCA outputs are sent to the inputs of a 3-in, 3-out matrix mixer, with the 3 outputs sent to the FM inputs of the oscillators. The matrix mixer allows for each of the oscillators to modulate both other oscillators as well as its own frequency. Having full control over a sub-oscillator has a couple of advantages. A single oscillator with sub-output feels very tight because the frequency of the sub is an exact division of the main frequency. Here's a dual oscillator voice with the first oscillator tuned to the root note and the second oscillator an octave below that. Using unique oscillators, you can modulate the oscillators individually. For example, you can add subtle random or LFO modulation to the sub or main oscillator depending on how grounded you want the sound to be. Adding subtle drifting adds nice analog width to the sound. Of course, the shape of the sub-octave makes a difference as well. The square is great for present bass, while a sine is great for clean sub-bass. You can explore other modulation as well. Here's the three oscillator setup again. Two LFOs are modulating the pulse width of the main and sub-oscillator individually. And to add some friction, a smooth random voltage is modulating the second oscillator with alternate tuning. Another slow random voltage is modulating the filter for some added dynamics. If you use a full oscillator with multiple waveform outputs, you can use all classic waveshape tricks in the book on a sub-octave as well. For example, you can send the square and sine wave output of the oscillator used as a sub to a crossfader and modulate that crossfader with an LFO to morph between the wave shapes. This adds a lot of character movement to the sub. Another fun thing to explore is using a VCO as a low-frequency oscillator. First off, using a VCO as LFO means you have in-depth voltage control over the frequency of the LFO. And that LFO can handle a frequency range all the way up to audio rates. Here's a classic dual oscillator voice. The third oscillator isn't tuned and used as modulation source for the filter frequency through a VCA. A slow smooth random voltage is used to modulate the frequency of the oscillator, swinging the modulation between LFO and audio rates. An inverted version of that random voltage is modulating the VCA, lowering the level if the frequency goes up to control the modulation balance nicely. Modulating the frequency of an LFO is fun in many patches. Here's the exact same setup, but the modulation depth of the LFO is controlled with a copy of the main envelope in the patch. And an inverted copy of the envelope is used to lower the speed of the LFO. You can have a look at this older video about the importance of voltage control over an LFO if you'd like to learn more. But you can get even more out of a VCO LFO by exploring other in and outputs. Here's one example where the regular square output of the third oscillator is used to modulate the filter frequency, and the sub-octave output of the same oscillator is used to modulate the resonance. To create interesting tempo sync modulation, a master clock is used to sync the modulation oscillator, as well as the main sequence through a clock divider. And to add some interesting wave shape shifting, an LFO is added modulating the pulse width of the oscillator, and the smooth random voltage is modulating the frequency. Just to be clear, that third oscillator is still used as an LFO here. Let me know about your favorite triple oscillator tricks in the comments. Have a look here if you'd like to learn more about nano or other synthesizer tricks, and as always, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.